So some time ago, before making this video, I had an interesting thought. Would it be possible to make an entire video game soundtrack without the actual game? Now, I wasn't really certain if this bizarre idea would even be possible for an average inexperienced music student like me, but I decided, why not? I was going to give it a try anyways. In this new series, I would not only make dozens if not hundreds of unique and coordinated songs, but I will also link them and make them easier to do through a script, some lore, whatever you want to call it, and then upload them all at the end. But oh boy, I didn't know this would be one of the longest and most draining things I would have ever done, and this episode would be far from the end of this whole challenge. Okay, so before we start making our very first song, which I'm really excited to do, if you see there's like a whiteboard right there that we're gonna use to plan our video. And now let's start all the planning for all this series. First off, since I decide what I put in my videos, I'm gonna decide it will be an adventure video game. I really like Zelda and all those things, so that could be an interesting idea to follow. Well, what will the main character's name be? I'm now thinking of the name Alex because I think it's a good name for like a main character. So what is the plot? So I thought a little bit about this in the recent days. I think it would be interesting to make a story where like Alex is like in his house and everything, and he goes to sleep and then he wakes up in a completely different world that's like really cool. We're gonna write it here. Fuck it. It doesn't have enough ink. We'll take a red one instead. Oh, and let me put some little emojis to make it more appealing. So I think it's done for our first song. That will be like a theme when you enter the game that's like based on like a dream and all that stuff. And we're gonna continue the board throughout the series between like each song or each group of songs to define a little bit the game. After that, things already didn't go as planned because I made a bunch of errors that compromised the first like 4 takes on OBS, like not noticing my camera was not syncing properly, recording only the camera footage, etc. And the one time I got it working, well, I didn't quite like the result, so I decided to make it better another time. Of course, since I did so many takes, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do. So I thought a good instrument to put would be a harp because it sounds like really dreamy and all that stuff. So we'll add that and we'll start making kind of an intro, I don't know. And actually I have an idea of what to do, just watch it. So I started this song with some kind of arpeggios and a pretty original idea of mine, which consisted of some notes that alternated between a constant low note and a melody with some other stuff after to end this intro. I then went straight for the main phrase composed of some long notes that contrasted with the intro. And to amplify this contrast and fill its emptiness, I thought of adding some percussions. But I began noticing that some things, weirdly enough, weren't adding up at the start. After some time searching, I found it was because of this weird time signature change that I added at the end of the intro because I just didn't notice I needed to add a couple more notes there. With that out of the way, I added a lot of percussions but changed them because some drums and some shakers were cleaner overall. I also added a simple tube accompaniment which I initially had a hard time differentiating from the main voice before seeing that it was better lowered by an octave, and added a marimba and some trombones with again a different accompaniment. After that though, I felt like the song needed to convey way more emotions, so I decided to add a couple of effects. After searching a bit, I added some powerful space booms to make the song more intimidating and a long sweeper before all of that, and also a second, stronger sweeper that tied everything together. But in parallel, I also knew I had to continue the main phrase, so that's what I did, and I ended with some long notes that I filled with some strings. Until here, I felt like this song really conveyed the dreaminess and the power I was trying to convey. Needless to say, I was very happy with all of that. So yeah, this first part is done and I think I'm gonna take a little break because this has been very difficult to do and I've never done anything like this, so yeah, I'll continue this tomorrow. Unfortunately, coming back I didn't have a lot of ideas, so I decided to continue the song later. However, I thought of a different and better narrative for the video game that I would do in a document so I didn't have to erase erase the board every time. And we're gonna put everything about the video game here. What I want to add is that he is in a rocket that is departing from the earth that is being consumed by the sun because it is dying. That sounds like a cool scenario, you know? So yeah, here I put the starting screen theme, but I think this should be the main theme of like this video game. That will be a space science fiction game. And it's funny because I thought of that, but like when I was a kid, when I read the sun was gonna die in like 5 billion years, I was extremely scared. Like I don't know why, like I'm gonna be dead by then. But as a kid, I don't know, I maybe thought I was immortal or something. What the fuck. So this is like the guidelines for the first song, and then I know the main theme isn't finished, but we're gonna make kind of a prelude to this main theme that will be Alex is escaping from the flames and is gearing up to get on the rocket with his teammates. Well, no, without teammates it will be a better experience and escape. So since I was done with this first planning, I started the second melody by making a really complex rhythm with everything from drums to hi-hats to toms at the end, adding a synth over it and making a couple of phrases with both. But I started feeling like it wasn't epic and fast as I wanted, so even though I now think while editing this video that it wasn't that much of an issue, since I was pretty concerned about it, at like 12 PM I came with a plan to deal with that issue. Again, I added some percussions and then made a rhythm with some horns to make it more dynamic. However, I don't think I should have added to that instrument, because imagine if someone tried to reproduce it in real life. It would be such of a pain to do that for the entirety of the piece with a brass instrument. Well, that's definitely something I'm gonna change in future videos. In fact, a bunch of things are gonna be changed and improved until the end of the series, when I release the entire soundtrack. So what I'll show in this episode and the following will surely not be the final result, but it's already a really cool base to know a little bit how they'll be then. Going back to the song, I made a phrase with some trumpets that could be described like vintage or something like that. In fact, I don't really have any words to describe it. Then I made the end of it have a lot of notes to somewhat repeat it on a marimba in a really cool way, and after that I did like an answer with the trumpets. I then got interested in finding some effects to use in this, and I soon found a cool disco beat that really shaped the song, although I think it ended up sounding a little bit like a police chase. Now, I also searched for something to fill a long note from the last phrase, and I put a disc scratching effect. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty weird. I might change it in the future. While adding all of those, I added the first phrase again with a different answer with another phrase, and then copied everything. And to end all of this, I made an arpeggio at the end. After all of that, I got back to the first song, which I had duplicated its first phrase. But I already faced another problem. For some reason, the audio was delayed in this project. I did some research off camera and found a solution. But even if the sound wasn't delayed anymore, the sound still played after I stopped it. This was very annoying, and after trying relentlessly to continue it, I figured it would be impossible to work like that, so I decided to take a little break to update the video game story. So for the next theme, it's gonna be an exploration. So he pumps up the gas to find somewhere to go, but he will be encountering asteroids and monsters, and here the player controls the ship. I think this is pretty good. After fixing that issue of camera, I came back and I was finally inspired to do an ending for the first song, and I figured that both songs would need kind of some fade out, but the only problem was that I was working with MIDI notes and I didn't really know how to fade them. After another bit of research, I was able to put some in, and I was finally done with these first songs. The next song I wanted to do was about space exploration. At first I wanted to add a lot of action to it, but after adding an accompaniment with a bass guitar and some percussions and a melody with a hard rock guitar, I understood it was maybe a bit too fast for this. Before remaking it, I decided to add something before the melody in the escape theme, and after finding an alarm sound off camera, I went back to the current song and decided to do it in a more relaxed way with more harmonious instruments. I started making it another time by adding some French horns and then added something called a flute organ after them, and then added a beautiful melody with a harp that I repeated a bunch of times, while adding some spaces between every repetition to make it less condensed. Talking about space, I then saw that I left some empty space at the start, so I added some space ambience from the internet. And I also repeated the first phrase with a low trombone note instead of the harp. Okay, fast forward a little bit, I was at my music school and I didn't really know what to do, so I decided to continue with my script. So, we're gonna remove that and monsters part because the mood of the song changed a little bit. And then I had the idea of the player hits an asteroid and then loses conscience. Nice, so that would be it for this song. And then for the next song, the player wakes up in a tent and then hears a conversation. He also talks with them and they explain him the context, and he prepares for his first mission to find a new world to live. Wait, but that's true, it doesn't really make sense. If they're here, there's already a place to live, so So I have an idea. In the second song that we did, we could do that he's in a rocket with his best friends. Oh, this is after this scene was filmed. Sorry, I forgot to add that his friends get ejected and he loses their sight. And then he prepares his first mission to go find his friends. That would be an interesting idea. With they explain him the context, he also tells them that he lost his friends, so they offer help to help build a new civilization. So yeah, I think that would be it for an introduction for this whole video game. And then after that, we'll start making like the first mission to go with like the first bosses and everything all the way to the final boss, that the more episodes we do, the closer we'll be to that goal.
3 hours later.
Okay, so I've just come back from my music school and I've realized the story that I imagined isn't really good. We're gonna remove that best friends part. Instead of like the objective of the game is finding the friends, what would be more logic? Find a place to live. And then something that didn't really make sense is, why is he the only one departing from Earth? Well, maybe he's not the only one, but by a miracle, its rocket is faster than the others and he is one of the only ones that survive. That thing that hits an asteroid and then loses conscience, I'm gonna remove that and I'm gonna put that he finds the first planet. And the objective is to find a place with water and oxygen to live. So the fourth song will be really simple. When the astronaut leaves the rocket, like he jumps and he falls like in a Tears of the Kingdom cradle style, if you know what I mean. So after all those changes, I came back to the song we were doing. To continue it, I started adding a B phrase, but then I did the worst thing I could possibly do. I forgot to set the OBS well and lost the following footage. But let me explain to you what I did in that time. I decided to remove the spaces between repetitions because there were already a lot of long notes to make it slow and harmonious, and I also continued the B phrase and I copied everything I did a couple times with a pretty harmonious ending with the harp. After finishing this song, I continued with that fourth song we planned before. I made a slow melody with some trombones and some xylophone notes to fill up the longest trombone notes, and I tried adding some samples to add some action. I found a saxophone sample, but it didn't loop well, so after trying some other samples, I searched for a wind sound to put in this instead. Well, I'm not sure, because is it like before he jumps or the jump? I know, it's kind of weird. I know. This could be a theme for like when the player goes out of the spaceship to fix something. He's like in space but not completely in space, if you know what I mean. So to make this new ambience, I changed the wind sound for the space sound we already used and made the song slower and added more notes to the marimba. But I still wanted to make a falling sound, so I started making a new song another time. Okay, so now let's do the actual falling sound. For this we'll use a trumpet, some trombones, and of course I couldn't make something without a marimba. Really, I'm using the marimba in all of my songs, but it's really good. I started this new song by making a pretty fast melody with the trombones and some trumpets interchangeably. And then I tried adding some stuff like a marimba accompaniment and some percussion. But since I thought it conveyed too much action, I tried making it slower and added a bunch of wind effects to simulate the character falling. But I couldn't get it to sound good, so I started to get a little desperate. To skip this mental rabbit hole, I started making a fifth song, which would be the first planet the main character lands on, a big mysterious jungle. For this I wanted to use some flutes because I still hadn't used any woodwinds until then. And I added a bunch of unique percussion to build a cool ambience, along with another phrase with an oboe. But I also wanted to add a bass drum, and I wonder why there weren't any in Logic Pro. Spoiler alert, I would have found it if I searched a little bit more in the program. But it was pretty dumb, so I searched online if I could find one. Since it took me a lot of time, I didn't record it, but here I explain what it is. Okay, so as you can see here, I've downloaded a sound and I've put a lot louder because it was really quiet. Okay, so here I didn't really finish my phrase, but really I was done explaining the sound, so I got back to what I was doing. To start off, I noticed the timings were kind of wacky, so I tried a bunch of stuff like lowering the tempo progressively, which is called a retardando in music, removing a bunch of stuff and a lot of other things, but nothing worked at the end and I put everything to the trash. Yay! But don't worry, I recovered it afterwards. I continued this by remaking the oboe part and then copying the first phrase another time, but making that part be different to lead to a following phrase that I did with one instrument and then another. After changing the oboe for a bassoon, I made a new phrase with it that served to add a little more variety, and after copying everything while paying attention to doing a loop, I was done. This song is by far one of my favorite songs I've done. It contains a good amount of phrases and its effects are really nice in my opinion. So that meant I finally reached my first milestone, making 5 songs. I checked every single song to see if I had to add or change anything. On the first song, Law and Order of Creation, after finally deciding to remove that weird disc scratching effect, I made those long notes shorter since there wasn't any sample to fill the void anymore, and I added some risers. On the second song, I changed the ending because I felt like it was a little off, I don't know why. On the third song, I changed the trombone note and some empty space by a bunch of notes on the harp in both. On the fourth song, I changed the second phrase to have a different melody and added another phrase, and I didn't think I had to change anything on the last song. Even though these songs weren't anything special, I think they were the founding for what's coming next. By the way, if you've been enjoying the video until now, I would highly appreciate if you could give it a like and also click that big shiny subscribe button so you can keep up with this series and see more videos like this if you want to. Without further ado, let's start the second part of this episode. So first of all, I started making the falling theme another time. This time I wanted it to contain a bunch of notes with repeating patterns and a saxophone, just as the sample from the last time. And I added some long notes with some horns and a melody over it with a harp, but couldn't get to do a lot because I didn't really know how to continue it. Instead, I decided to update the lore. Now, he's in a jungle planet and he finds a man that tells him where to find a place to live and survive. Since all the other planets don't have enough resources, well, he isn't really a man because it would not make sense. Like, a person can live here but this man is living here, like what? So he is an alien that has been studying the human race. He wants to help him because he thinks humans are incredible and should not go extinct. So The seventh song could be like he is telling him his background and all the stuff. So I decided to express that in that song by making it like it would sound next to a campfire. I started adding a synth for the first time to do the melody. I actually chose the default instrument Logic Pro, the classic electric piano, which was pretty cute and all that stuff. But then something very funny happened while I was searching for that campfire ambience. All of a sudden I found a beat straight out of a diss track and did what any normal person will do. I added it to my song, making the ultimate thug song. No, don't worry, after that I searched for a fireplace sound and put it instead. To diversify the melody, I also added a horn phrase in between phrases, and it came pretty cool even though it was pretty simple. After that, since apart from deciding that I would do a battle theme, I wanted the next planets to be a hill zone with a lot of rocks and then a desert, but I felt they didn't really match the first jungle planet, so I decided to make that planet more of a technological wasteland that would make more sense with the others overall. That meant I had to put aside that beautiful jungle theme for later and make a new theme. For that new theme, I decided to make some cool and calm percussion pattern sections with a slower tempo, which allowed me to add a reggae style melody with a bass guitar that I accidentally almost changed for something called a baby bass. Like, what the hell is that? I continued it with a metal pan to add more variety to it, but it ended up sounding like it belonged in a haunted house. So I searched for a replacement and I soon found a bass that I could use. To add more to the percussions and make it a little goofier, I added an African kit and stacked many sub-instruments onto each other, and I also added a synthetic effect at the start and changed the bass for a funnier sound. It sounded a little goofy overall, but I think this goes well with the theme we chose. Then, after finishing that, I started making the battle theme, which I started with a bunch of percussions, but after some weird timing issues, I thought of adding a fast 2-note succession with some trombones. I wanted to add some percussions in our time, some long notes with some horns, and a melody with some trumpets, but it ended up being very confusing, so I decided to leave it for another day. Little did I know, this song would end up being my biggest nightmare throughout the rest of this episode. Then, instead, to calm myself down, I decided to do the hill theme. But oh no, my struggles weren't ended. I tried harps, flutes, violas, percussion, slow melodies, the freaking Among Us theme, but nothing seemed to work. To see what a hill theme really sounds like, I rewatched some of the Holy Breath of the Wild soundtrack and my mind got relieved. Inspired by it, I used the piano to make a really simple and calm melody, which consisted of a few phrases, the second one being a variation and a continuation of the first phrase with a lot of ta-la-las. I also added some atmospheric sounds, and this was it. Even if it's extremely simple, don't worry because I will add more phrases to it in the next revision. But then, it happened again. Okay. Here the recording actually froze, but this is kind of like a cave theme because in that plains planet there will be like some caves and everything. So like when you enter some caves and you explore those caves, this theme sounds, and it sounded like kind of creepy. I don't know if that's the right emotion for it, but whatever, we'll see. And well, I added a piano, a marimba, a choir that I found that the church choir sounds good, and a tuba to do like some basses for like ambientation. And yeah, I haven't finished it, so we're gonna continue it. So I continued that creepy melody by completing the marimba part I made and copying everything, but with that part being more developed. And after some other stuff, I also added a French horn and a bunch of European folk instruments, which contained a really creepy voice that I of course didn't add because at this point it was a bit too much. And overall I thought the song didn't fit in a cave anymore, so I decided I was going to remake it. Before doing that, I decided to come back to the battle theme because I knew what the issue was. I needed to add another 2 notes to the rhythm we did. Oh, and I also removed everything else. I added some new percussion, a new first phrase with an acoustic guitar and the trumpets, but even if this was better and I fixed it, I didn't really know how to continue it, so I decided to leave it like that. After that small pause, I finally decided to redo the cave theme, and immediately after starting, I made 3 notes with a marimba and they automatically created an ambience. So I started alternating between them and some European percussion instruments like we used last time, and at the end of all of that I did something pretty funny because I tried to add a chord progression but it ended up sounding like a pop song, so I removed them. I then started adding a new phrase combining some flutes and some French horns with many repetitions and an appropriate ending after them, and then I started to add some cool abstract samples. Like a period that sounded a bit like someone rewinding a clock with the percussion we put there. Some that sounded like some water droplets, etc. But then, while searching for them, I discovered something mind-blowing. The meme sounds of the alarm and the suspense sounds are actually in Logic's library. We're like, what? My question is, do they come from here, or has Apple quietly taken them here without anyone noticing? Guess we'll never know. After adding some final things to that song, I came back to the battle theme, again, and I removed the melody with it. Again, and I changed the percussion completely. Again, and I tried adding some new things and continuing the melody, but turns out I was as lost as when I tried to do it last time. This was definitely not the last time I would have to deal with this freaking song. After that small failure, I finished the falling theme, but I didn't have to do much. Just add an ending for when a character falls onto the ground, and I also added a French horn in the middle of the melody. Although I think I should have made a separate melody for the ending, I think it's still nice. Now remember I said that I would add more stuff to the hill theme? Well, after that, on that song I added a bunch of Latin percussion and an entirely new phrase that sounded much more like a normal song. That served to add more diversity while still being chill and relaxing. Okay, so I think we should be done with this song. We definitely added a bunch of things, so it's really cool now. I'm still not sure how to do the battle theme, so we'll do a new one which will be our 11th song, and we have to plan it. Okay, so I've got the idea that there could be like a village in this planet, but like it's populated by weird aliens, and the villagers, when you enter the village, like are kind of shocked, and their leader asks you some questions. Since I was now done with that 3rd or 4th session of planning, I don't really remember, I got ready to do this 11th song. I added some accordions to start making a village ambience, making a pretty happy melody. Afterwards I added a lot of percussions that needed to have a pretty weird distribution, and some long saxophone notes that occasionally slipped onto the melody, but I soon found myself not being able to continue this, so I left it for later. After this bit of confusion, I started to make a song for the desert planet that I was really excited to do. I started by adding some drums, and then I remembered that I thought oboes sounding like desertic sometimes, so I added them with some clarinets and some other percussion, but after finding a better instrument for a job called the pipa, I replaced them. However, I removed everything after seeing that it all sucked in general, and then I started making an entirely new melody that alternated between some percussion and a mysterious and slightly off-tuned melody, with some clarinets at the end which weirdly enough made some pyramid-shaped note successions. I also added a wind sound from the internet and another phrase with a vibraphone, an instrument that kind of sounds like some bells, and then all the instruments, and then I continued the melody both with the already existing melody and some other phrases from the vibraphone repeated by all the instruments. After finishing that, I came back to the village theme we were doing, but I jumped directly to the one that was for the ambience of the village because I didn't really know how to continue the other that we did. In fact, I later decided to only keep this one. I started with a classic 3/4 accompaniment with an accordion with some percussions and made a melody with some flutes that I made a variation of. And I made a bunch of other phrases that, while each being different from the others, I think they were pretty repetitive since we didn't add anything new to any of them. I'm so sorry. Having finished that, I saw that I needed to add more stuff to the desert planet, like some pyramids and a sphinx, so I decided to make them a theme. I took an instrument called the guzheng to make a mysterious melody and added some percussion with gongs and stuff like that after it. But I found that an instrument called the Persian santur gave that vibe too. So after a bit of indecision, I found the second one was a little better. I added some chorus to add to those vibes and added a nice melody with the flamenco guitar, and to end that phrase I made some stuff with all the instruments. So, to make a new phrase, I decided to continue the melody with the centaur. But wait a minute, let's do a trivia. What do you think I added there? A. A cool solo with a bunch of drums. B. A melody with some new instruments. C. Some chords with other stuff. Or D. The freaking Angry Birds theme. Of course, you guessed it, the answer is D. While not exactly being the same melody, it still shared a big similarity. But the worst part is that I did it by accident. So yeah, this will definitely be the first song I'll modify in future episodes. Anyways, after those inconveniences, I had an idea for another planet, an ocean planet, with small islands and archipelagos that would do a great combo with the other two. I also imagined an accompaniment for its main song, so I put it in place with some Caribbean steel drums, which are pretty tuned and melodic despite being drums. All good until now. But then I wanted to add a melody to this rhythm, and it turned out to be very difficult, and since I couldn't get to do it, I decided to do something with a less confusing rhythm. To make this new song, since I wanted to make the ocean feel better and ominous, I decided to add a Latin kit with a pretty deep synth. But while searching for it, I found a really interesting one. Maybe not necessarily deep, but really, I don't know, dreamy, that gives feelings of loneliness and liminality. I put it like this, a note from it followed by some drums with different patterns and note progressions with an extra synth near the end. However, I wasn't done with this. I wanted to experiment a little bit with some synths to add more depth. I started adding the note progressions a second time with some aquatic voices synths to kind of combine the two and also the extra synth at the end. And then I added some pulses and some bubbles with two other synths. A more classic synth that paired well with the zone with some maracas, and a full synth with a lot of reverb after that zone just right at the end. I think this might be one of the most atmospheric sounds I've done, and although it doesn't have a really clear melody, its effects and all its reverb make it pretty damn cool. So with that I understood something. Instrument choices matter a lot when doing ambient melodies. So I decided to keep that in mind while doing my next song, a theme for the depths of that ocean. Out of the gate I added a deep bass and another time the aquatic voices, but now with something that would maybe be a melody. I know, that I developed with a lot of gongs too, that all ended sounding really eerie. After that I decided to add some lo-fi voices, and after continuing the first synth melody I ended it with a few notes on another synth and finally a tiny nylon kalimba. There weren't a lot of measures, but since I put the tempo very low I thought it was already long enough, so I left it like that. However, another time I still wasn't done with this planet. I thought it would be nice to add a mini boss to the depths, so the first thing that came to mind was a kraken. Very original. To keep the same ambience I added that same deep synth, however I didn't keep the aquatic voices because they weren't epic enough for this. So instead I put a series of notes with some French horns and prepared a bunch of other orchestral instruments to set this all off. After that I started alternating between those series of notes and a melody with the trumpet, and I realized that to contrast those two things I could add the same series of notes on all the instruments but turn those into accompaniments for the melody. I added some little percussions on top of some that I already put, and then I thought the melody should change a little bit from that, so I extended the first rhythm the third time to go to another tone, and then I added more melody after that, with a really cool trumpet thing. Later, I decided to continue this song by removing the percussions from the zones without the accompaniments to make it sound better and more contrasted, and I also did a completely new phrase. Not gonna lie, it kinda sucked, so I removed the accompaniments later, and copied everything another time with the extension, now leading upwards to a cool melody with many build-ups and stuff like that with those magnificent trumpets. However, all that inspiration wasn't limitless, so I had the idea to come back to that first song with weird rhythms to try to fix it. I started by removing the abnormal time signature we put, and after tweaking the weird rhythm we put at the start, I added a new melody that was very happy, almost fakely, because it would come from a radio from the beach. But while doing that I noticed that the rhythm still sounded a little off with the melody, so I made it much simpler and it sounded way better. After that I put some percussion and continued the melody, but I felt the continuation was better than what I made before, so I removed that, and after tuning it a little bit to make it sound like it actually came from a radio, I continued this new melody, repeating stuff and making new phrases. For example, on an intro that I made simplifying the main melody. In that time I also had the idea to add some samples to make it better, but it made it sound more like a boring stock music, although I think this goes well with the ambience we chose. After finishing it, I came back another time to the Kraken theme to make the last changes to it. I finished the area with the build-ups, but upon finishing I finally realized the problem there was with the transition to that area, but shortening it would make it land on a different note. And that meant that to have the same melody as I did, I would have to move down the entire phrase. After that, I also had to add a new accompaniment to the phrase where we removed them, but guess what? It still sucked ass. Guess we'll have to change a bunch of things in the near future. Oh, and however, there was something I was putting off constantly, which was the hugely non-updated lore. Okay, so here we didn't finish this part, so their leader asks him some questions. He says that he was sent here by an alien and he needs to find a planet. No, I think maybe there shouldn't be any village at all, because it feels like more barren, more empty. So the village theme that we did, we're not gonna use it. And we could do an Oasis theme. Yeah, we'll do that like before we reach the end. And we could add like a mechanic that you have to have certain materials to like leave a zone or something. Like, we're not gonna enter in depth in the lore because it's quite impossible to do without doing the actual game. And in the 7th song, the alien will also explain to him basic mechanics and the atmosphere mechanic. That you have to collect some strange materials exclusive to that planet or group of planets. And I think we could also put like in the planets there will be a lot of materials that the player isn't forced to pick up but are useful for side missions, trades, and buying and selling things. Okay, so right there I finished explaining all these new mechanics. And I'm gonna skip this next part where I script the songs that we didn't script because I already explained them before doing each of them. So we'll jump directly to the scripting of the last songs of this episode that are still remaining. Okay, and then the songs that we're gonna do now. So first off, the first song, we could do that there's like a sun in the middle of every group of planets and there's like a boss battle. But this won't be the boss battle, it will be the route to the boss battle, if you know what I mean. This sun will be made of giant pillars of stone, water, and other things related to the planet. So then we have the first boss battle, and this will be the typical boss battle like in Zelda that has like a first phase and a second phase. Well, this boss will have 2 phases, but future bosses will have more phases. So I have kind of thought of what the boss could be. It will be a knight that controls water and earth, and in the first phase it will have 3 main attacks. A lance attack that makes its lance bigger and covers a big area. A short attack that he uses in close combat, and the knight could be riding a sand creature, and a dash attack where the creature dashes and deals damage. So in the 19th song, the boss battle will be in its second and last phase, and this theme will be like a more rhythmic and epic version of the first theme. The knight will literally fuse itself with the sand creature. The terrain will be different and it will absorb things from the environment. It will have the same attacks as in the first phase, but there will be more attacks. When it picks up materials, each one will have different properties when thrown at the player, and the creature will try to bump, get over, and squish the player. Okay, so I think we have it. Now we just have to do the actual songs. So finally, with that immense list of complex mechanics and planning finally done, I was now ready to start bringing those last songs to life and finishing this this episode. First, I began by making the theme for the first boss's planet. I started by making a march-like song with a melody with many orchestral instruments and a lot of different percussion that went well with the mood. And I also made a cool transition with some claps and stuff like that, but I really wasn't in the mood of thinking, so I decided to finally make that one idea I had while continuing the video and story. An Oasis theme for the desert planet to add more stuff to it. I started by making a lot of stuff with some flutes and some ukuleles, but I never was able to find the good melody to use until I made this accompaniment. Before adding any actual melody to it, I added a bunch of Latin and African percussion. And then I added with some Caribbean steel drums that I later changed for a really soft sound. However, I was having a lot of troubles to find how to continue the melody, so I decided we needed to finally do the infamous, the horrible, the mischievous battle theme. And after putting some little percussions in a tuba, I didn't know what else to put. Oh well. I then came back to the last song and finally had an idea for a B phrase, but not a lot more. Another time. So I came back to the boss's planet theme. I started by adding some new percussions to the intro, and I added a melody with a Celtic flute and other woodwinds after the long note at the end of the transition, and I continued it with a bunch of other instruments as a response. But before I knew it, I found it sounding too much old village themed, so I dropped it and started another version of this theme. To start this new theme off, I reflected for a sec and realized that doing this I completely forgot the ambience that I planned for this song. I originally wanted it to be a mix of all of this zone with a bunch of pillars of rock, so I decided to follow this idea a bit more while doing it. I added some similar percussion but with some clear differences, and I added the new melody with an acoustic guitar, a second one with a Celtic whistle and some more Caribbean steel drums to finish it all, that surprisingly ended up sounding like a South American song. I don't know why. After that, I ended up adding a mix of all the instruments for some more variety in many cool phrases, and with that I was finally done with this song and I would be able to finish the Oasis theme. However, it happened another time while doing it. I forgot to change scenes in OBS so it only recorded my camera, but this time I don't think I have to explain much. I basically changed the main voice by an accordion and made new phrases with the power of inspiration and thoughts, just like that. After that, I still had a last thing to do before doing the boss themes. I really wanted to get to do them once and for all, which was the cruel and annoying battle theme that at this point I left on like 5 times, because for the sake of storytelling I wanted to make it before I made the boss battle themes. But then guess what? I forgot to change the scenes another time and lost all the footage. So again, let me tell you what I did. I removed the melody I was trying to add and continued the first rhythm with variations of it and other phrases, and a rhythm that I didn't use in another song that I thought sounded well here. I also left some holes in some places to complete them, so I added my good old friend the marimba in those areas, and oh boy it sounded cool, especially in the second one. And to top it off, I added some long notes to the remaining instruments and it was all done. So these last songs until here were good to say the least, but I wanted to make the boss battle themes way better and way more creative, and make them the best songs of the soundtrack by putting 100% of my efforts into them. For starters, I knew exactly what to do in the first phase because I had an epic Spanish melody in my head for the past months, and I figured out this could be a great idea here. I started by adding an introduction and the start of a melody with a long note at the end, but at some point I figured it would be better to put it in an actual flamenco guitar. With it I finished that phrase with a similar tune, but this time with a cool tremolo. And the next important part I had thought of was about adding a series of notes with some brass to fill those long notes. And of course I also had to add more percussions with instruments like some maracas and some castanets to the intro to fill it up a little bit. However, these were the only things I planned, so I didn't really know how to continue all of this. Since I was in that situation, I decided to do the unthinkable, to come back to the battle theme a last time, for real now. However, I didn't change or add anything to the melody, and instead I decided to revamp the entirety of the percussion percussions and the accompaniment with the argument that it didn't make any sense. After that, I came back another time to the boss battle and continued some percussions that I started adding to the melody. But wait, if you can notice, I added something. Between both, I added a transition that even if I had it in mind, I had some trouble doing it while recording because I struggled to concentrate, so I did it off camera. Afterwards, I added some long notes as an accompaniment, and then I copied the first phrase but extended it without the brass, which came out in a really cool way. And I continued it with some notes on the marimba copied identically with the brass. To end that phrase, I added some hype melody on the guitar that contained a strange tremolo that I don't know why sounded absolutely incredible. However, following that, I had a lot of trouble to add the first phrase another time after that because we spent like 30 minutes to figure how to make a transition between the two, so I ended up letting it unfinished. After that little inconvenience, I made an accompaniment with another guitar and then I made another phrase that, let's be honest, was pretty mid compared to all the others we've done, even with the marimba accompaniment and all that stuff. After that, I spent a bunch of time for a second time trying to work out the transition, but this time I got a decent result. Finally. Anyways, following that, I added the accompaniment with the flamenco guitar to the places I had to add it. But while doing that, I found something incredible about it. And now let's change the accompaniment a little bit, like... What? What the... Oh, I didn't know that. What? So that's how I discovered that when you put some notes under the note C1 in a flamenco guitar, it makes a unique flamenco sound based on the note we selected, which is just gorgeous. I decided to put it all over that phrase and it made it at least 10 times better. And since I was basically done with this song, it truly made me motivated for the last phase we were about to do. So this was the plan: make a song similar to the first phrase, however with more stuff to it, with a faster pacing and an overall more epic mood to it. To start this, I thought it would be cool to make the same intro but very fast, with a pretty strange chaotic rhythm. And even if I was skeptical of if this thing would work out at first, it surprisingly ended up sounding pretty good. I then put something similar to the main theme of the last phase but with more notes, and I even pulled the entire melody of the last song to paste some aspects of it to this phase. While doing that, I had the genius idea of adding some choir to make it truly like a boss battle, and to add even more stuff, I added the weird sped up intro quietly to all the song, and it all surprisingly sounded amazing. I added some new brass instruments to do something similar to the brass patterns of the first phase, and then I added another phrase with a different brass pattern, and strangely enough it ended up connecting back perfectly with the main phrase. I don't know how I was able to land everything perfectly so quickly, but hey, I'm not complaining. So the only thing there was left was to make no more than a couple more phrases to this last song and we would be finally done for this episode. So the last cool idea that I got was to put the literal copy paste of the main phrase of the first phase, but with some changes of course, followed by a hype series of patterns that really ended that phrase well. After that, I thought it could be a good idea to add that flamenco guitar quirk that we discovered in the last song in the last phrase to make it even fuller, to end it in an even more epic way. And I ended up all of this by adding a little ending. So yeah, this was it for now. I was finally done with this episode, and even though this one had been pretty tough, on this first time I was successfully able to surpass all the hardships, all the songs doomed to fail, all the errors, and all the moments I felt like I had no inspiration and I didn't know how to continue all of this. Even though before starting I had very little experience in not only making atmospheric music, but using digital audio workstations as a whole like the one I use, Logic Pro, I was able to make a surprisingly good first batch of songs. I now look back at the first ones I did in this episode, like the Earth Escaping theme, the main theme, etc. And when I compare them with the boss battle we did at the end, I realized that damn, I've made a lot of progress and gained a lot of experience in only one episode. And even though most of the songs aren't perfect and need a lot of fixes, I think I did a pretty good job this first time, and I'm gonna get better through every episode of this to make them all superior and make a lot of new great songs. Speaking of enough episodes. Since we're now done with this one, I feel like I can ask you again to subscribe and leave a like on this video if you liked it. But while you're waiting for the next episode to come out, you can watch this video right here if you wanna know my takes on music instruments. Who knows what might come in the next episodes, what wonderful things I'm gonna discover and what terrible nightmares I'm gonna face. But for now, the only thing I can do is to say thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.